that prompted me to start writing the book. And in the course of doing the research, I found out that basically, as I began to suspect, the people who were sent to Afghanistan also were sent to Yugoslavia. I found through John Schindler's book, Unholy Terror, that these were some of the guys that had been trained in Afghanistan and fought in Bosnia and were involved with the planning or the execution of September 11th.
Now, let's stop right there. This is so huge. The KLA out of Albania involved taking over areas from Serbia. Serbia fights back. They're called terrorists on the news. NATO bombs them. I'm not saying the Serbs are perfect. The point is that, again, using them as a secret army and then meanwhile using the drug money, from what I've read, to launch the next operation.
That's exactly right. The guys got NATO intelligence. The guys got NATO training. The guys got money and drugs to sell back and forth to finance their operations, just like they did with Iran-Contra. In Michel Chossudovsky's website, there are a number of articles, Global Research Canada, that talk about using drug money to fund the war in Yugoslavia and to destroy the country.
I want to go back to 9/11. And again, if you just joined us, visas for al-Qaeda, the former head of the Jeddah, Saudi Arabian U.S. Embassy visa section, who saw them letting terrorists fly around before, then after, talked to people involved, and he's going to get to that in a moment, and basically said, hey, let these people in. They're not really terrorists. They work for us. I want him to get back to that in a moment. But to know that they are using al-Qaeda-type groups as secret armies against the Serbs, against our basic liberties, using that threat to take our freedoms, against Syria, Libya, Iraq, I mean, all over the world, this is getting so obvious. What do you make now of the reports by Southcom that ISIS is coming into the Caribbean and Mexico and into the U.S.? Is that just hype to get more government funding, or are they covering their butt?
I don't know for sure. The first I heard of it actually was when you mentioned this on your show just a few minutes ago. I'm inclined to think this is more like George Bush and these other people saying, well, if we don't stop Iran and Ronald Reagan, if we don't stop the Contras in Nicaragua, we're going to have to stop them in Harlingen, Texas. I would suspect that this is basically hype and beating the drums for more security, more removal of personal liberty, and to pump more money into these organizations in the Middle East to destroy the rest of the region. There's still a few people left there who are fighting back. They're doing it in Yemen. Bashar al-Assad, he may not be the world's best president, but
he didn't start the war, and he's certainly better than al-Qaeda, and I want you to be able to speak to that. I agreed until about 6 months ago with your view that it's just more hype to get more FBI funding and more Homeland Security funding. The issue is, though, I see them allowing ISIS to recruit 18 and 25-year-olds all over the world, from the U.S., Canada, Europe, England, to Australia, to fly there to fight. It is a proxy army, and I see it being promoted domestically as kind of trendy. And then I ask, are they going to allow ISIS to attack to even take more liberties? It's just getting really, really suspicious.
Yeah, it's conceivable. I mean, when they were recruiting for Afghanistan, there were 52 recruiting offices in the United States for the Mujahideen. They were rounding up Arab Americans to either fund the operation or to be recruited and trained to go and fight in Afghanistan. I was thunderstruck at that. I hadn't heard about that at all, but it was in Peter Bergen's book, The Osama bin Laden I Know.
That's right, and that's now admitted. And, of course, Reagan didn't, I don't want to blame Reagan. He didn't know at the time either, but obviously he had all those meetings at the White House with the Taliban leaders, and, I mean, ridiculous film footage, but that happened.
Yeah.
Wow. I want to get into the book in the next segment. I skipped a break. We got a few minutes left here. Give us the meat for new audiences that just tuned in because it's so groundbreaking what you were able to discover and talking to your colleagues that were still in the State Department about how many of the hijackers were actually given visas to come into the United States, even though they were on a terrorist list, and what story was given to force the embassy to do that.
Well, as I discovered in researching the book, 15 of the 19 hijackers, according to the Los Angeles Times years ago, got their visas from Jeddah. And I thought I had raised enough hell with my Freedom of Information Act lawsuits and letters and speaking out that they would stop this stuff. But I learned in doing the research that this Shayna Steinger, Steinger, she was hired for my position in Jeddah to issue visas straight out of Columbia University at an FSO for a very high rank with someone with no experience, no training, and just a student background. She did this. She issued the visas, gave equivocal answers to the 9/11 Commission, and has since gotten promotions and is still working for the State Department.
Wow. And we know Muhammad Atta then and others were able to go to some other training camps in other part of the world and come back through Saudi Arabia and then into the U.S.
That's what I've seen. You know, these guys moved all around. They gotten visas from the U.S. And if you get a visa from an American consulate or an embassy and you go to another country, they're very quick to issue you a visa because, look, the Americans had investigated them. They have better resources than we do. In addition, they went and they came back. And it removes bars to their travel.
Amazing. Stay there, because this ties into everything we see happening now. The book, Visas for Al-Qaeda, J. Michael Springman. I'm Alex Jones. Stay with us. In the third hour, we're going to have open phones and hit the economic news, the TSA news, the Russia news, the Mexico news, more on our investigation down on the Texas-Mexico border with Joe Biggs and others. I'm going to play some of the congressional hearings where they're like, we've got to ban bloggers. They're like ISIS. And that ties into this new memo put out to the armed services. We were leaked it through the Coast Guard. It's got phone numbers and emails, folks. It's confirmed saying they're preparing for veterans to attack on April 19th and that we're the biggest terrorists. So talk about using 9/11 to set up a police state and then focus it on domestic legal constitutional organizations. It's pretty amazing to see this transformation. We're going to get Mr. Springman's take on that, the NSA, and so much more. As a lawyer and as a former diplomat, what he thinks of the transformation of FOIA requests. People say, I don't care about FOIA. Well, most FOIA requests now go unanswered, even though it's federal law. The government operates in secret to, quote, keep us safe, but then won't release any information. That is a recipe for total enslavement. We're going to talk about it in a moment. Visas for Al-Qaeda, CIA handouts that rock the world, and that ties into this story in the New York Post just a few days ago, how the FBI is whitewashing the Saudi connection to 9/11, what we told you 14 years ago, what he told you 14 years ago, and he joins us now. Again, the book is something everybody should get. You should support people that are telling the truth. You should give this to skeptics and friends and family and others, or donate it to the library. That's how you win an information war. Let's speak some about the book. You've agreed to take phone calls. I'll give the number out for specific 9/11 questions or visa questions or FOIA questions. This is a very important issue. 800-259-9231. 800-259-9231 with specific questions or brief comments for our guests. But I want to finish up talking about the book. You're a smart guy. I want to get your take on the NSA, on the way America's changed, on where the world's going in general, and how do we turn this around? So, Mr. Springman, tell us more about the book itself.
Well, the book starts out essentially talking about my experience in the State Department and the problems I had getting in and the problems I had once I was in. We've mentioned this a little bit earlier about my issues with Jeddah. I went on from Jeddah to Stuttgart in Germany, where I had been there some years before. And it turned out that the two of the three consuls general that were there worked for the Central Intelligence Agency. In fact, I was told by the legal advisor's office at the State Department not to link Day Mount, it's D-A-Y, like the day of the week, Mount, and Doug Jones to any of the American intelligence services. These were guys that blocked me from what I was doing, created difficulties for me in the office. And it was just absolutely amazing. They refused to do anything at all about following what was going on in Germany with the younger generation. They clung to the old guard, the people who were in their 70s and 80s and above who had lived through the war and the end of the war and just loved America and couldn't or wouldn't see any good in talking to anybody else who might have had a different opinion about the United States, who might have had a different opinion to where Germany was going. But it was a rocky ride there for 2 years as well. So I went on from there and pointed out some of the problems these people created and how they violated the law and regulation.
So bottom line, they were letting Al-Qaeda, Saudi Arabian secret armies have U.S. visas that basically get them in any country in the world so they could carry out their nasty operations, narcotics trafficking, murder, terrorist attacks, you name it.
Oh, not in Stuttgart, but in Jeddah, this is what they were doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I want to continue with a book that walks through how all this works in fine detail. It's so important. But go back, because you got cut off by the break. Talk about the KLA, because that's come out since you talked about it, that so much the 9/11 funding came out of there, Albania, all of that, the Clintons. I mean, this is bipartisan. This is how they fund this stuff.
Yeah, it was run very much like they ran Iran-Contra. They were slipping money in secret to people. They were giving training in secret to people. They had intelligence given them. Clinton didn't have a clue about foreign affairs, and he went along with these people. They wanted to do to Yugoslavia what they had done to Afghanistan and create a cadre of essentially terrorists, a wrecking crew, if you will, that would go from country to country. And by God, they've done it. They've started in Afghanistan. They went to Yugoslavia. They had drug money running the place. They even worked with the Iranians to fly plane loads of weapons and supplies in. The German delegate to the peace talks and to the mediation conferences they had, he was a fellow from their external intelligence service, the Bundesnachrichtendienst. So it was a really nasty operation all the way through. And it wasn't quite as well concealed as they've done since then. They were still learning, I guess. They took one guy, a Norwegian helicopter pilot, a Captain Ivan Moldestad, to a hotel balcony and threatened to throw him off because he was asking questions about unmarked aircraft with fighter escorts flying into airfields in Yugoslavia. And he wanted to know where they were coming from, and he contacted the NATO aviation center in Vicenza, Italy. And nobody wanted to talk about this.
Man, I mean, it just sounds like a giant mafia worldwide is using radical jihadis to destabilize countries. And sometimes they overthrow the country and put them in charge, or they remove them, and then they come in and make massive, amounts of money off of the response. It just sounds like something Spectre would do out of a James Bond movie.
Yeah, it's almost too fantastic to believe. You've got Yugoslavia broken up into small, ineffective statelets. They've been trying for years to break Iraq into three pieces. They haven't quite succeeded, but the Kurdish North, through the Israeli influence and American efforts, is almost a separate country. And they're trying to split the Shia South from the Sunni center as well. They haven't quite done it, but they've in fact wrecked everything in the country where you have electricity for only a few hours a day. Nobody has any education anymore. It was one of the shining lights of the Middle East with a great literacy rate. Women had equal rights with men. People were educated. The language of instruction for doctors, medical doctors, was English. And Iraq is a failed state. They moved the people into Libya and murdered Gaddafi. Libya, under Gaddafi's rule, while he may not have been a wonderful philosopher, king, leader, but under his rule, Libya had one of the highest standards of living in all of Africa. They murdered him, shot the country up, destroyed the country, and you read in the paper every day that there's a new terrorist attack, there is a new government, and there is a attempt to secede from one part of the place or the other. And then they've moved all the bad guys into Syria, and they've done pretty much the same thing there. Syria is essentially a non-state now. Damascus the oldest continuously inhabited city in the world, is about the only thing that Bashar al-Assad really controls. And they've destroyed most of the